Hello, I'm Ollie and this is Criminally, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today, a brief history of pulp fiction. So this is a question I get a lot in the comments. What do I mean by pulp? I use the term in every video in my introduction at the start. So I thought it was worth making a quick video today just to talk about what I mean by that, my perception of what pulp fiction is. What I would say though is I am by no means an expert. There are far more knowledgeable people than me on BookTube who talk about pulp fiction. Two channels in particular I would recommend you check out are Michael K. Vaughan and McNulty's Book Corral. I will leave links to both of their channels in the description for the video. Those guys really know their stuff when it comes to pulp fiction. So let me talk today then about what I mean by pulp fiction. And what I wanted to talk about is two things really. One is what I consider to be like the four eras of pulp fiction. And the second thing is some, pulpy type books that I personally really enjoy and read. But before I do that, let's just talk about what pulp is at its heart. And for me, it's very similar to the kind of stuff I talk about on the channel and term affectionately as trashy fiction. So this is like popular, mass-produced fiction. Fiction for the masses that's designed to sell quickly, to have a short shelf life. So not books that or stories that anybody, when they were first published, expected to have a long life, to become classics, although some of them definitely have, and I'll talk about a bit about that in a minute. But more, light entertainment for people who enjoyed reading. So often pulp fiction is very sensational. It can cash in on, the kind of the trends of the day and things like that. And it's also often, written very quickly to tight timescales. So a lot of the pulp writers were writing for magazines, were churning out stories week on week. So we're writing to very tight deadlines, which sometimes, can be to the detriment of the stories. But at other times, I think gives them a kind of like feverish creativity, which is really, really fun to read. So, as I said, I think there are four eras to pulp fiction. So let me talk about what those are. So the first really, I think, is kind of the latter half of the 19th century into the beginning of the 20th century. And this is characterised in the UK by the penny dreadful, which are often kind of serialised stories published in magazines, very sensational, often with kind of crime or horror elements to them. And in the US, dime novels, which were often Western. So again, kind of melodramatic, sensational stories, packed with action and things like that. And as the name of both of these things suggests, these were forms of literature that were cheaply produced and cheaply sold. So sold to a ravenous public who lapped this kind of stuff up, but designed to be written quickly, sold cheaply, and just to entertain the masses. So an example of a dime novel I have here is one of the Nick Carter books. So Nick Carter kind of got a second lease of life in the 60s and 70s as a spy. Started out as a detective, So this is a Nick Carter detective novel that was originally published in 1886. So that's kind of your first era of pulp fiction. So the second era then is the pulp magazine era, which really ran for the first half of the 20th century. So pulp magazines got their name from the fact that they were printed on cheap pulp paper. So again, this concept of fiction that was disposable, that wasn't designed to stay around for centuries. But the pulp magazines did produce some great writers. So people like H.P. Lovecraft, Robert E. Howard, Dashiell Hammett and Raymond Chandler all started writing in the pulps. Two of the really big ones were Black Mask, which was a crime magazine, and Weird Tales, which published kind of fantasy and horror fiction. So the pulp magazines were really important in terms of giving a launch to some really big writers, but also, like the penny dreadfuls and the dime novels, just as being a source of entertainment to millions and millions of people. And whilst a lot of those stories are lost, a lot are still available. So obviously, authors like Chandler and Hammett, their work is widely published. You can also get lovely collections like this, the Big Book of Pulps, published by Otto Penzler, which has loads and loads of. You can see it's an absolutely huge book. Has loads of stories from the pulp magazines. Let's move on to the third era then. So the third era is the men's adventure era, which really ran from kind of late 40s through to the 70s. So men's adventure magazines were really an evolution of the pulp magazines. But whereas the pulp magazines had focused on publishing fiction, men's adventure magazines did also publish what was termed as non-fiction, so articles, some of which I'm sure were 100% true, but many of which were somewhat spurious in their origins. There were loads and loads of different men's adventure magazines. I am going to do a separate video where I talk about a company called Men's Adventure Library, who are republishing a load of old stories and articles and things like that from the men's adventure magazines, and they do a fantastic job of it. I've got a couple of their books here. So this one, I watched them, Eat Me Alive, gives you a real sense of what those men's adventure magazines were like. So, very sensational again. This book focuses on stories about people going up against wild animals and things like that. So full of action, full of kind of blood and guts and things like that. But again, very, very sensational. And then you've got what I consider to be the final era of pulp fiction, the paperback boom of kind of the late 60s, 70s and 80s. So a time when loads of publishers were churning out books, often in series, with lurid covers, very sensational topics to cash in on the public demand. So think of things like the paperbacks from hell, the kind of classic horror novels of the 80s. So I've got Relics by Sean Hudson here, which definitely qualifies for that. You've got series like the Long Arm Western series, so kind of slightly spicy westerns. I've got a Shell Scott mystery here by Richard S. Prather, the Scrambled the Eggs. And then you've got the Men's Adventure series, so following on from those Men's Adventure magazines, series like the Executioner series by Don Pendleton, which I absolutely love. So these are the kind of things that I tend to read nowadays. I think as someone who grew up in the 70s and 80s and saw some of this stuff, in bookstores, it awakened in me at a young age a fascination with what was in these books. So things like the Executioner series I really enjoy now. I'm gradually working my way through that. I'm up to book 22 of about 450. And also the Survivalist. So the Survivalist series, a post-apocalyptic series from the 80s, is one that fascinated me as a kid. I remember these New English Library editions being really prominent in bookshops and always wanting to read them. So again, I am slowly working my way through those. At the moment, I'm up to book 13. This is book 11, which has a space shuttle on the cover to make it even cooler. So yeah, that paperback boom of the 70s and 80s, I really consider to be kind of the final era of pulp fiction, in terms of it being a time when those books sold a lot, when loads and loads of people were going out and buying and consuming pulpy fiction. Obviously, what happened technologically in the 80s was the growth of home video. And I suspect that, and then, computer games and things like that thereafter, helped to, tamp down the demand for this kind of fiction, because people were getting access to other forms of entertainment that satisfied their desire for action and adventure and horror and so forth. There is, though, one type of book that I think can still be classified as pulp fiction, which is still published today, and that is the category romance. So Harlequin in the US and Mills and Boon in the UK still publish this kind of stuff. So quickly produced fiction that is often only on the shelves for like a month or two. Mills and Boon books and Harlequin books have a month and year on the side of them, on the spine. So they are designed to be disposable. So things like Teaming Up by Abby Gaines, one of the Harlequin NASCAR romances, or this Mills and Boon Blaze double, which has Come Toy With Me by Cara Summers and Drop Dead Gorgeous by Kimberly Ray. So again, fiction that is designed to be just fun and entertaining and quick for people to consume, and quickly produced as well. That for me is really, what pulp fiction is all about. So I hope you found that interesting. Do let me know what you thought in the comments, and there will be hopefully a video later this week where I show off some of my Men's Adventure Library books a little bit more and give you more of a flavour of what those are all about. Anyway, as always, thank you very much for watching. Hope you're safe and well out there. Hope you're reading good stuff, and I'll speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.